What is recovery? Recovery is a process that occurs after exercise to help the body to return to a pre-exercise state. The length of time of the recovery depends on the length of time of the exercise and also the intensity of the exercise. There are different factors in people as to why we can recover faster or slower. The first factor is fitness level. Those who are more fit will recover faster. The reason for this is due to the strength of the cardiac and respiratory muscles and the efficiency of their body from the fitness and exercise. Those who train hard and are contracting their muscles with intensity and are consistently doing this means that the muscles will require more oxygen and also will need to dispel more carbon dioxide, which is done by an increase in heart rate and breathing rate. This will lead eventually to ventricular hypertrophy, where the cardiac muscle will increase in size, allowing more blood to be pumped out with less beats. Therefore, for recovery, this will mean that they are able to inhale more oxygen and pay back the oxygen debt during post-exercise, meaning that more carbon dioxide can be expelled faster and more oxygen inhaled faster. More CO2 can be expelled faster. A second factor is due to genetics. Some people's genetics mean that they will have stronger hearts or weaker hearts or bigger lungs, for example, affecting how much oxygen can be inhaled, etc. This shows that depending on different factors, it will mean that different people recover at different rates from exercise. The type of activity is also a key factor in determining recovery. Depending on the energy system used, this can affect how quickly a performer will recover. For example, those athletes using the anaerobic ATP-PC system for high-intensity exercise, such as a 100-meter sprint. This will mean that they can recover faster as it can be resynthesized quicker than, say, aerobic exercise, where there is a huge depletion in energy sources, such as from a marathon. Marathons can take days to recover, whereas a 100-meter sprint can take up to 5 minutes. Are there during recovery/events that occur? The demands set on the body from exercise have a direct correlation to the demands of recovery. This means that depending on the exercise, such as what it is, how hard it makes the body work, how long it trains the body for, the amount of reps that the exercise includes, the amount of sets that includes, the rests in between, the body will adapt to this and recover, but will take different lengths of time depending on what demands are set on the body and how hard the body has been worked. And events of recovery. The first event is ATP replenishment. Once the body has used all the ATP, or such as in anaerobic exercise where the ATP has been used up, the main thing that the body will do during recovery is try to replenish this ATP so it can be used again. The second event in recovery is PC store replenishment. So phosphocreatine has been split, and the next stage is, or in exercise, the PC or phosphocreatine is split to create energy. So the stage is basically replenishing this phosphocreatine so that it can be used again in the next bout of exercise. After this is lactic acid removal, which is when there is a build-up of lactic acid from anaerobic glycolysis or the lactic acid system. And this has to be removed, otherwise a build-up of this lactic acid can cause pain in the muscles and the inhibition of glycolytic enzymes, which basically forces the body to stop muscle contractions. The next stage of recovery after this is myoglobin replenishment, and then also after this is then glycogen store replenishment and energy source replenishment. EPOC. EPOC stands for excess post-oxygen consumption. This means that there is a large amount of oxygen consumed after exercise. EPOC is basically recovery, where you are breathing fast and deep after exercise to help increase the volume of oxygen that is entering the body and also expel the waste products such as carbon dioxide, helping the body to return to a pre-exercise state. In the graph, you can see that the E is called the oxygen deficit. The oxygen deficit is the difference between oxygen intake of the body and the oxygen that the body demands or needs within the early stages of exercise. The reason why the body cannot use the volume of oxygen that is required within the first few minutes of exercise is due to the dominant energy system being used. The energy system is anaerobic. To start with, the ATP PC store, as it is direct and an immediate source of ATP that the muscles can use. Then the lactic acid system, which can generate ATP that can be used for 2 minutes. However, the aerobic system has not become dominant yet due to its complexity and the length of time it takes to produce ATP. It has to go through the prep steps, the Krebs cycle, and then the electron transport chain to then make 38 ATP, which can be used by the muscles. Whereas the anaerobic systems have to split either phosphocreatine or glycogen to make ATP, and this can be done very quickly. Although you can see that in the diagram the aerobic system does become dominant eventually, the oxygen deficit can vary in size, depending on the level of intensity also. In higher intensity exercise, where the main energy system is anaerobic, this will mean that there will be a higher oxygen deficit, and also the oxygen debt due to there being no oxygen whatsoever. However, for lighter intensity activities, there will be an opposite effect. EPOC can differ in size for the same reason oxygen deficit and oxygen debt can too, depending on the level of intensity of the exercise. In maximal exercise, it is shown that the curve changes, or EPOC changes. In maximal exercise, the oxygen deficit will be higher and the overall curve of the graph, or the lactic acid slow component of EPOC, will be much shorter in comparison to light intensity exercise. So what actually is EPOC? Well, the graph shows VO2 along the left hand side, which is the volume of oxygen used by the body, and a rest period, then an exercise period, then recovery phase along the bottom. The recovery part is what we were talking about, mainly in EPOC. You can see in the diagram that there are two parts to the recovery phase, the slow component of EPOC and the fast component of EPOC. The fast component of EPOC, or known as the alactacid part, is what happens straight away after exercise. During this alactacid recovery period, the main aim is to attempt to resynthesize ATP and replenish myoglobin. To complete this, it takes around 2 to 3 minutes, and however 50% of the phosphocreatine has recovered and be resynthesized by 30 seconds after exercise. During this phase, there is around 1 to 4 liters of oxygen being consumed to help the body replenish myoglobin and resynthesize ATP. On the other hand, the slow component of EPOC, or the lactacid phase of EPOC, is represented by the long sloping line labelled D in the diagram. The aim of this phase of EPOC is for the removal of lactic acid and the maintenance of ventilation, circulation, and body temperature. During this phase, it requires around 5 to 8 liters of oxygen and can take from minutes up to hours. When lactic acid reacts with oxygen, we can convert this lactic acid back into pyruvic acid, back into Krebs cycle, and 65% of this can be converted into water and CO2, which can be removed by the body by exhalation. 20% can also be converted into glycogen through aerobic glycolysis once again, and the last 10% can be converted into protein. So, in this system, the main aim is to remove the waste products created by the body during exercise. There are also metabolic needs during the recovery phase too. Metabolic needs are the extra volume of oxygen that is consumed by the body after exercise by cardiac and respiratory muscles. This is because the heart needs to carry on beating and for oxygen to be sustained so that there is an elevated heart rate and stroke volume, and also the respiratory muscles require oxygen for elevated tidal volume and breathing rates. Also, ventilation and circulation needs to be maintained during the slow component of EPOC. The reason why ventilation and circulation needs to be maintained is otherwise the waste products won't be able to be removed by EPOC. If the breathing rate suddenly went straight back to resting after exercise, this would mean that all the lactic acid buildup wouldn't be able to be expelled by exhalation, and also oxygen inhalation wouldn't be as high, and there wouldn't be as much oxygen being consumed into the body as the breathing rate is too low, and also the heartbeat means that there's a faster circulation of blood around the body, meaning that the waste products can be expelled and the useful products can be entered into the bloodstream, into the muscles, where then recovery can take place. Here on the graph on the left, you can see the amount of PC or ATP during exercise and the recovery periods in between. You can see that there is 100% of ATP or PC at the start of the exercise, and then you can see as the curve goes downwards, this indicates that exercise is occurring, and then you can see by the two dotted lines, recovery then occurs, and you can see the spike in ATP PC, so it's starting to recover, but then it starts to dip again once exercise occurs. It then goes right down again, and then you can see that the recovery phase, the ATP PC rises again and then drops and rises and drops and so on. So this graph is basically showing that the PC/ATP system needs recovery in order to be fully used again by 100% or higher as 90% to 100%. And so it can be used to its full capability. Whereas if there was no recovery, the ATP-PC would just deplete completely, and the ATP wouldn't be able to be used in the anaerobic exercise. Whereas on the graph on the right, it shows on the left graph, you can see that this is moderate intensity activity. You can see that it's an epoch. They're both epoch graphs. The one on the right is a maximal intensity activity. So on the left, you can see that there's quite a small oxygen deficit, and the reason why the oxygen deficit is smaller in comparison with the maximal intensity activity is due to the fact that that main energy system being used in the moderate intensity would be aerobic, mainly as they're exercising for 50 minutes. They can't exercise for that long whilst using anaerobic energy systems. So the main is going to be aerobic. So because they're using more oxygen to create ATP, this will mean that there's going to be a less of an oxygen deficit compared to that of maximal exercise, where there's no oxygen whatsoever being used, intaken by the body to produce ATP. You can also see that there is steady state exercise reached in the moderate intensity activity. This is where the volume of oxygen consumed is equal to the volume of oxygen demanded by the exercise. So this is indicated by this flat line just between the recovery and the rest period. You can see that just flattens up at the top of the curve. Whereas in the other graph showing maximal intensity activity using anaerobic energy systems, you can see that there is no plateau, or there's no line during the exercise period. There's no line indicating steady state activity, exercise. And this helps to suggest that there's no oxygen being used in the maximum intensity activity to create energy. Another big point that can be shown is the recovery period. You can see in the moderate intensity, the recovery is still quite long. If you look at the bottom where exercise is 15 minutes, it's relatively similar. This is also quite similar for the other intensity graph. It shows that it still doesn't take as long, and the reason for this is because maximal intensity activities, where the ATP-PC store is being used or the lactic acid store is being used, this ATP can resynthesize fairly quickly in comparison to expelling all the waste products that are used in moderate intensity activities. They both have waste products, but the moderate intensity activity is going to take longer to recover due to more muscle contraction taking place, more CO2, and also a depletion of more energy sources like glycogen and fats. It's going to take longer, as you're going to have to ingest more glycogen or glucose and carbohydrates and fats to replenish the stores so that it can be used again. Whereas for maximum intensity, it would take around 2 minutes to fully recover. Moving on to DOMS. DOMS stands for delayed onset muscle soreness, and is the pain and stiffness that can be felt by performers from hours after the exercise into days after exercise. DOMS is attained by very extraneous high demanding exercise, such as a Wingate test. It is most strongly felt from between 1 day to 3 days after exercise. And the reason why there is DOMS is due to eccentric muscle contraction, such as letting the bicep go down from a bicep curl, as the bicep is lengthening as it contracts, eccentrically contracting. Usually during eccentric movements, the eccentric load can be much greater than the concentric load. This means that if you were to bicep curl 10 kg, it's going to be much harder to concentrically contract the bicep, bringing it upwards towards your head, compared to controlling it back down, due to the eccentric load being able to carry more weight. From this stress on the muscle, this causes micro tears to the muscle fibers, and it is thought that DOMS is the muscle adapting rapidly to prevent muscle damage. It's kind of like a reflex implemented by the body to prevent overuse and therefore injury of the muscle. The main aids to recovery is a warm-up and cool-down. A warm-up allows the body to increase the volume of oxygen intake before an event.